man whose professional career had been built on patience, careful listening, and a refusal to label human behavior hastily, offered a gentle, reassuring smile. He adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles and leaned back in his chair, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "Please, Mrs. Milligan, tell me more about him," Jeremy said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the room. "What exactly does Mr. Edgar Witherspoon do that causes you such concern?" "What does he do?" she gasped, as if the question itself were absurd. "What does he not do? The man is always looking for things. And I do not mean normal things like his reading glasses or his house keys. No, he is always searching for the most ridiculous, useless junk you could ever imagine. Just yesterday, seemingly random items were suspended from the ceiling by thin copper wires, fishing lines, and colorful threads. There were old metal spoons, rusty keys, a single red high-heeled shoe, a collection of faded postcards, bicycle gears that turned slowly, and glass jars filled with colored water. A gentle current of air, perhaps from a small electric fan hidden in the corner, kept the entire structure in a state of slow, hypnotic motion. It was like standing inside the mechanism of a giant, whimsical clock. "How is it, Cloushade?" Edgar asked, referring to a small, dusty stuffed cat perched on a shelf. "It is very interesting, Mr. Witherspoon," Sinclair said, his professional curiosity entirely eclipsed by sheer wonder. What is it? This?" Edgar asked, gesturing to the entire room. "Yes," Sinclair said. "This is the only thing that keeps the world from going poof," Edgar said simply. Sinclair stared at the old man, trying to find any trace of deceit or manic episode in his face. There was none. Edgar spoke with the calm, matter-of-fact certainty of an engineer explaining a blueprint. "Now, let me understand you clearly, Mr. Witherspoon," Sinclair said, stepping carefully around a tripod made of wooden rulers. "You say that this is what keeps the world from going poof. And it is not easy," Edgar sighed, adjusting a small brass weight hanging from a string. "Most things are nearly impossible to find. Where would you look for a skate key?" "Oh, I cannot imagine," Sinclair said honestly. "I found one, though," Edgar said proudly, pointing to a small metallic key dangling near a light bulb. "You think that is crazy? Well, you wouldn't by any chance have a business card, would you?" "Oh, yes, of course," Sinclair said, reaching into his breast pocket and pulling out a small white card. Edgar took it with a look of immense gratitude. That was an easy one. He carefully placed the card on a tiny wire platform, balancing it against a small piece of blue glass. Immediately, a nearby pendulum began to swing with a slightly different, smoother rhythm. "Well, I will not take up any more of your time," Sinclair said, feeling a sudden need to process what he was seeing. "I have seen more than enough. I used to be an engineer," Edgar said quietly, his voice carrying a touch of nostalgia as he watched the card balance the scale. "Earned lots of money. Then I retired. Worst mistake I ever made. Life was so damned boring. And then the voice spoke to me." "Oh," Sinclair said, his clinical instincts returning. "You also hear voices." "You too?" Edgar asked, his eyes lighting up. "Please tell me about it." Sinclair cleared his throat. "No, I mean, I study people who do. Tell me about your voice." "I was sitting in the park one day," Edgar said, leaning against a sturdy wooden workbench, feeding the pigeons, and suddenly, there it was. The voice. "Edgar," it said. "Have you ever been to England?" "Oh yes, why?" "No, that is what the voice asked me." "Edgar," it said. "In the heart of Big Ben, there is a pendulum that tells the clock how fast to tick. At the bottom of the pendulum, on top of the big weight, there is a stack of pennies. Every so often, they take one off. The clock speeds up. Or they put one on. The clock slows down. The pennies change the balance just a little, but enough to keep the whole mechanism running perfectly." "So," Sinclair said, looking around the room, "what you have here is some kind of clock." "Of course not," Edgar scoffed. "Why would I build a clock? $3, any drugstore, does not lose 10 seconds in a year." "Anyway," the voice said, "Edgar, the world is a funny place. Little wars here, big wars there, volcanoes going off, storms, tornadoes, a terrific amount of noise and bother. You have to build something that will keep the world from going too far, maybe even going poof. What the pennies do for Big Ben, this does for the world. And who do you think it is who is speaking to you? Sinclair asked gently. Well, Edgar said, looking up at the ceiling as if searching for the source. Sometimes I think it is God, and then I think no, God would have a deeper voice. Would you care for a prune, Doctor? Oh no, thank you, Sinclair said, backing toward the door. I was just leaving. But you have just arrived, Edgar noted, a hint of disappointment in his voice. Oh, careful, Edgar warned as Sinclair's coat brushed against a dangling metal spoon. I have no idea how the thing works, Edgar continued, his tone returning to one of quiet resignation. All I know is that the voice tells me what it needs and I get it. Goodbye, Mr. Witherspoon, Sinclair said, stepping out into the hallway. You keep up the good work. We could call it a sculpture. Would that make my niece happy? What? Edgar asked, looking confused. Oh no. If you happen to run across an old tuba, Edgar called out as Sinclair began to ascend the stairs. Would you bring it by? I need it in 2 hours. The next afternoon, the sterile green walls of the psychiatric observation ward felt cold and unwelcoming. Cynthia sat in a chair by the window, tears silent on her cheeks, while Edgar sat on the edge of the stiff hospital bed, looking small and fragile in his standard issue gown. Sinclair stood nearby, clipboard in hand, feeling a heavy knot of professional duty in his stomach. Cynthia, do not do this to me, Edgar pleaded, his voice cracking. Uncle Edgar. Please, Cynthia sobbed, holding her hands to her face. It is just for 3 days while they observe you. It is too long, Edgar said, his eyes wide with a sudden, sharp panic. It has to be maintained, kept in balance. Mr. Witherspoon, Sinclair said, stepping forward. You hear voices. That is not normal. You must understand that. You hear voices, too, Edgar countered, looking directly at Sinclair. No, Sinclair said patiently. Healthy people do not hear voices. You hear mine, do not you? Edgar asked. That is not the same thing, Sinclair replied. Why? Edgar demanded, his voice echoing in the small room. What is the difference between a sane man hearing a crazy voice and a crazy man hearing a sane voice? Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. You do not understand the risk you're taking. Edgar suddenly went rigid, his head snapping toward the window. His eyes glazed over as if he were listening to a distant, incredibly faint sound. I knew it, Edgar whispered, his shoulders slumping in defeat. There goes Tatoa. What is Tatoa? Sinclair asked, matching the old man's sudden gravity. A tiny island in the South Pacific, Edgar said, his voice flat and hollow. What time is it? Sinclair checked his watch. 3:17. At 3:17 in the afternoon, Tatoa became history because of you, Edgar said, looking at Sinclair with a profound, quiet sorrow. Please, while there is still time. It will take me days to clean up this junk. Keep her away from it. Remember Tatoa. Later that evening, Sinclair sat in his study, the memory of Edgar's words haunting him. He tried to rationalize it. It was a classic case of grandiosity. Tired, feeling useless in his retirement, the old man had created a complex fantasy to give his life meaning. It was a typical delusion of grandeur that he was vital to the world's survival. Cynthia had visited Sinclair's office after leaving the hospital. Poor Uncle Edgar, she had murmured, her eyes red. You will take good care of him, won't you? I will, Sinclair had promised. Now, Sinclair reached over and turned on the radio, hoping the news would distract him from his thoughts. Mideast stalemate continues. The announcer's voice drifted through the quiet room. Congress passes the Transportation Act. And in the South Pacific, the tiny island of Tatoa is destroyed by a tidal wave. Details on this and all the news in an hour. Sinclair froze. The glass of water in his hand trembled, spilling a few drops onto his papers. Did he say Tatoa? Sinclair whispered to the empty room. He lunged for the